Every day another door closes, but a new one opens again. Whoa, every way we travel must end, but there another road begins. Whatever you've seen, haven't you heard?
This last lecture is on the symbolic life, and so I'm going to wrap all of what we talked about together and try to indicate why I find this so important, and hopefully that'll happen with you as well. So we started with kind of the personal experience and the collective and the social, and then last time we talked about the Temenos, creating the sacred space where all this can happen. And I'm just going to tell you that story in slightly different language so that the fuzzy memories that you have from the previous lectures kind of solidify a little bit. And so I'm approaching them from a slightly different angle, and hopefully that'll help memorize or remember parts of the technique. I think about the way that I discovered this process and why it became so important to me. All my life I've been really interested in creative issues. And ever since I was as an adult, I have drawn from the nude about once a week. And after years and years and years of that happening, I started to realize that there was some deeper mechanism going on. And when I project back and try to figure out what that was, I think what was happening was I was drawing with a group and I was drawing by myself. And those two different experiences, because of what we talked about in alchemy, when you separate them, then they allow perspective one to another. So I draw with the group, and then I'd go and draw by myself with the model, and I recognized that that was a little deeper. And finally, I figured out it's because of the difference of what I call the Temenos. Because in the group, you're in social space, just like if we were doing this outside the wall. Alone with the model, I was able to create this kind of altered social space only because I have this Temenos that is insulated social space from the outside world. And then it becomes more like wilderness, and wilderness is what we need for really open creativity. And for me, I just love that. The more creative I am, the more excited I get. Now, some people are really stimulated by limits, and it's like you can only use a certain size of paper, you can only use these elements, you've got to get this done by Wednesday afternoon. Sometimes that really stimulates people's creativity because the wide openness is really scary. But for me, man, let me at it. So you kind of have to feel in your own practice what is most helpful for you. And for me, the point is to find your own kind of creative culture. And I give you an idea of what works for me, but just like religion, don't buy a already boxed set. You can use that to start with, so start with my suggestions, but then figure out what it is that you need. When is the best time of day that you work? How long do you like to work at a stretch? What kind of environment do you have? I mentioned Michelangelo last time. Here's this brilliant, absolutely stunning artist, and he loved to work in just a crowd. So he'd be in the middle of the piazza, and there's guys throwing footballs and telling dirty jokes and chasing women around, and he's out there, that's great if he does that, but I really need to be able to concentrate. And I need the qualities of that Temenos. So the music, the lighting, all this stuff really helps me to focus in on what's going on between me and the model. So the symbolic life refers to that whole business that is beneath just the existence of the persona. In our culture, we are so besotted with reason, with this logos existence where we basically take everything literally. Even like sacred scripture, fundamentalism is saying, well, this is what it says. It's got to be literal. And I'm not saying that's a bad way to live, but it's pretty limited. For instance, we don't have a lot of support for the kind of for developing a symbolic life. And in fact, religion is one of the ways that historically we have always been able to use the religion almost as a tool to go deeper into our own life. And without that, there just really aren't very many encouragements in our culture to live a symbolic life. So what the hell is a symbolic life for? Nobody even really has a grip on what that means. But I was thinking about this and I realized there's one thing that we do really, really well with the symbolic life. So I asked Dundee, oh, I want you to go to dinner with me. And the literal interpretation of that, or her interpretation of that will be, oh man, I'm really hungry, yeah, let's go to dinner. But then there should be, in an intelligent woman, in a culture later than the 50s, will recognize that there's an underlying layer. So she should be able to say, oh, I wonder what he's after, And we just are really naturally very good at that because we do social interactions all the time. And this is the way people work. We always want something that is not necessarily the literal thing we ask for. The boss says, I want to see you in my office. Well, we're pretty sure that if you just go into the office and you say, here it is, you want to see this side or that side, and then go back to your desk, he's not going to be happy. There's another layer of it. So for me, what that signifies in terms of art is looking once and seeing twice. So when I'm drawing with the group and everybody is looking at the model like an object, that's looking once and seeing once. And when I figured out that I could see the model not only as a shape, but also a psychic presence, a person, I was looking once and seeing twice. So I'm seeing on the personal level and on the deeper level. Who shatters my gaze into 1,000 rays? And the idea here is your gaze is like a light beam. You look at the model, and what you experience is this whole spectrum of different feelings, like light hitting a prism being turned into a light spectrum. For me, each one of those rays is a different way of feeling about the experience. I can spend a lot of time trying to delineate between those, or I can just fly emotionally and say, oh, I like this feeling, or that one scares me, and I can work with that as part of the drawing. So if you think about it, if you're drawing a grizzly bear and you're not scared, you're not really understanding what the grizzly bear is about, right? If you can get yourself into a position where you are terrified of being in the presence of this really wild, uncontrollable thing that can bite your head off, you're going to get a good drawing. No matter how much skill you have, you're really approaching it with a sense of passion, and it's obvious that you care about it. So all this has been illuminated for me through the incredible founding psychologist Carl Jung, who really developed a lot of the principles that we talk about, like archetype. That was his word. And a lot of his influence persists in our culture, but it's kind of odd that we don't know very much about it. And in fact, I have a personal library of Jung books that's probably 3 times the size of a public library. And I find that really astonishing. So anybody wants to borrow a reading book, you gotta call. So I'm thinking about my phone. One of the things that I find, really convenient, but also pretty frustrating, is every week or two, I turn on my phone and it says, here's your update, right? It's as if we cannot survive in this culture without the absolute latest thing. The assumption is, if it's new, it's going to be better. Everything is always getting better. And I want to contrast that with an institution that really, really helps us with the symbolic life. So our culture has usually operated with this up to the minute update attitude. The newer something is, the better it is. So if you read a book that's published 5 years ago, it's going to be better than one that was published 15 years ago. An exception to that is the Catholic Church. It's 2,000 years old. And how many other things do we have in our culture that are that old? I mean, there's a few things like the Masons, they're disappearing. And those old service clubs, there's a little bit of that. But the beauty of something like the Catholic tradition is it's rooted way, way back in history. And all through that time, it's been developing. It's kind of like, it's just like a software development. It gets better with time. So by the time we get it, it's thunderous. It's really, really powerful. And I'm not a Catholic for good reason. I'm a Protestant. But what Protestantism is it almost seems like they took this beautiful old thing and they took all of the ritual and all those old patinas out of it, and they refashioned it and republished it in stainless steel and glass or something. And so the tradition is pretty darn shallow. It ends up being kind of like a talk show. It's all intellectual, very, very little symbolic activity. So the reason I bring that up is because we all need a symbolic life. And it's very hard to find a model of a symbolic life, and the Catholic Church is a good example. But again, be wise about it. What I do, I love the ritual element, but I don't like the theology. So I'm kind of I'm a connoisseur of foreign Catholic churches. So when I go to some other country, I love to go to a mass, and I can't understand the language, so I can't disagree with the theology. But all the ritual and the parades and the presentations and all that is really fascinating to me. Because what it does is it engages the deeper parts of my being. A life based on this attitude that the newer is the better just is not good enough for me. There's not enough of the old resonance of what it is to be a human being. And that's one of the reasons why this technique is so powerful, because it engages those deeper layers that have a connection to history and to the past life of the human soul. It's almost like the symbolic life serves as a weapon, a protective weapon, not an aggressive weapon. So if somebody asks a woman for a lunch date, and what they really want is to jump in bed with her ability to be able to figure out that second layer of meaning is kind of a protective weapon. That's why I mentioned women of the 50s. Seems like the presentation anyway is that these bimbos would not have a deeper life. They're just absolutely surface. That may not be a great example, but I just was trying to think of a really common symbolic life indicator that is very helpful on the everyday. It seems to me that in truth we really all need that. So I talked about the different layers of the psyche, every one of us has at least these 4 different layers. The one on the top is the persona, which is your ego. That's the literal layer. Beneath that is the unconscious. So that's the part of your own psychic makeup that you're just not aware of. Just like your heart beats unconsciously. It's part of you. There's a mechanism, but you don't have to think about it. You don't have to devote any brain power to it. And beneath that is the archetype. So the persona is the individual with a name and a history. Beneath that is the unconscious, which is their whole history. I include the unconscious of when I was in my mother's womb. That's part of my history too, even though it's not conscious. The archetype is me on the level of every man who's ever lived. That every one of us is built in a double fashion. So I am a man. I am born in this world with this physique and this psyche that has a masculine character. That's what I'm able to live out in my life. But I am attached, permanently attached, to this unconscious character that is feminine. That's my anima. And my life's work is to figure out how to make a life that isn't just masculine, but incorporates these two, because it helps me to keep in balance. And with women, it's exactly the opposite. You're born with this feminine part that sticks up above the water and everybody sees, and you're able to really live these feminine principles and so forth. But you're attached permanently to this masculine figure that is inside of you, called the animus, that it is your duty and your life's calling to try to balance these things. And I'm sure you know people like this, the guys that drive around in big, huge monster trucks with, big fat tires and a big smokestack and a Confederate flag in the back. They're just incredibly macho. They are almost, without exception, pretty unbalanced. It's hard for them to find their feminine part. And you can say the same about women that are obsessed with something feminine, like a beauty pageant or something like that, and they can never really enter into their own masculine strength. But if you're able to incorporate those things, you have a much smoother life. The reason I brought up the Catholic thing is because I learned something brand new a couple weeks ago. I didn't know this, that when Carl Jung was working with real patients, working with people's psyches, he discovered that he had very few Catholic patients. That people, just regular, everyday people walking down the street that couldn't really manage their lives. There was a big factor that the Catholics had it easier because of this kind of built-in symbolic life. So I just made this little mandala. The mandala is the symbol of the wholeness of the psyche. So all of these principles can be seen in this pattern. So you have the masculine, the feminine, you have the yin and the yang, all these different opposites. So I talked about when you're in the studio with the model, the fact that you are different, that you're two different people, creates a distance. All human beings have a life force that is called the eros. It's the same thing that a plant has that makes the plant grow up into the sun. Always propelled forward. Your eros propels you in the direction of growth and connection. There's an opposing force that is a little harder to talk about, It's an alternative force, but it's not necessarily negative. It's situated against the forward-moving eros. And I like to talk about the resistive force of that, because any relationship is built on the model of a bridge like this. You have one person, you have the second person, and I gave you the example of the tower bridge, which is just two big, huge towers with a little roadway in between. If the roadway falls in, it doesn't make any difference. So it's kind of like two people that have a relationship that don't care about each other. But you're in the studio, you're engaged with this model. If you create this kind of codependent shape to your interaction, one person's eros is going this way and you're totally unbalanced. The other person's eros is going this way, totally unbalanced. But if you're attached, you cancel each other out and the whole thing becomes balanced. And if they're very close together, there's not very much tension between them. As they move apart, the attention increases, the risk increases, and the engagement increases. So we can get into this situation where you're working with the model, and it feels like you're about to be eaten by a tiger. You're really, really captivated by this presence. And that to me is this situation where both are engaged and both are at risk. What that creates is this charged space in between. In alchemy, it's called the third thing. First thing, second thing. Here comes this third thing, which is like the wildness of the wilderness. And that wildness is like an electric current. And just like in a dynamo, you put the electric dynamo in a stream of water or wind, and it is forced to turn around. And as it turns, the torque creates energy. That's what's burning. Well, this is solar power. That's different. But that's what creates the energy that we use. And to me, that's where art comes from. You go in the studio and everything is flat, and you're trying to kickstart your ideas. It's just like, oh God, you can spend 10 years just sitting there thinking, like, oh, what am I going to do? But you get into this process where there's a dynamic force going on, and you cannot stay still. It creates this energy. You have to do something with it. And for me, it just comes out in art. It's amazing to me. But I want to point out, if this is a wheel, what happens with the dynamo is it starts to spin around. And as you realize when your tires are unbalanced on your car, if it's out of balance, it starts to wobble. Or in a washing machine, if the clothes are all on one side and it starts to spin around, it pretty much breaks down because it cannot spin when there's an imbalance in the design. I know this is very technical, but it's a great metaphor for how we operate psychically. So I'll add another element, which is the things I talked about, like masculinity, for me, puts a weight on one of these. If this is the yang side, and this is the yin side, my masculine personality means that I am weighted on this side. And so when this starts to spin around, it wobbles around like crazy. And if I'm not balanced, I just cannot function very well as a human being. And the trick, or the cure for that, is to pay more attention to the feminine in my life. So if I'm working with a female model, it feeds that. It's like medicine for keeping this thing balanced. So let me give you an example of the critical need for balance. Once upon a time, there's a young man very, very talented young man, lives in a village with a bunch of other people, and they all work together day after day, and he loves his work, and he loves these people, and he has kind of a minimal education, but he's a natural engineer, absolutely brilliant guy. And like a fish in water, he doesn't have any separation from his place on earth, so he doesn't know his address. But we, being separated from where this guy is, we can look at him and say, oh, that address is a labor camp in North Korea. So here's this guy. The work for the community is big, huge truck drives in, and they dump a big pile of garbage, and then everybody, pitches dirt into a basket, and somebody carries it up to the top, and they dump it on the pile. And this is their life's work, burying garbage. Now our little engineer friend is a dreamy guy. He goes to the top of a cliff in the compound, and he can see this expanse out beyond the walls. And everybody's known that there's never been anybody that has ever lived outside the walls, that it's poison or dangerous, something. But it sure looks beautiful. And one day he's carrying on his work, and he sees this paper, and it's a page out of an encyclopedia with an airplane design. And he reads the whole thing, and he says, my God, if you put this thing together, here's the fuselage, here's the wing, here's the tail assembly, there's a little flap that goes up and down that directs this thing. He says, I could stand on top of that cliff and fly like a bird. I could go off into that distant land. So he builds this thing, and he gets his friends, follow him up to the top of the cliff. And he says, okay, he's standing on a skateboard. He's ready to give him a push. He says, okay, here we go. And they give him a push, and what happens? Poor guy crashes and dies. I don't like that ending. But this is what happens when we don't have balance. Now let me wind you back 1 minute and slightly change the story. There he is, standing on the skateboard. He's all excited. God, this looks so beautiful. Ready to go. Okay, guys, give me a push. Oh, wait. God, I almost forgot to put my damn second wing on. Bang. Geez, that would have been a disaster. Okay, push. Off he goes, just flying. That's the beauty of balance. Being able to be well balanced between all of the parts of your character is what allows you to move forward in life. And for me, it has been the impetus for creating an incredible amount of energy in this relationship that creates this torque that is almost unendingly creative. And in fact, it's gotten to be so bad, I've overdone it a little bit. I got up this morning, I got up because I needed to rest. Because last night I was so torqued up. I slept maybe an hour or two and created 6 pages of notes, all these ideas. My God, every 10 seconds there's a new idea. I've way overdone the creativity, but that's how I know it works. And I love the process, and I just love the creation. I'm talking about Carl Jung. This guy was born in 1875. He gives us, I think, a terrific gift of being able to determine the ecology of balance. But interestingly enough, there's always been a resistance to that in our culture. And one of the things that he complained about, or that he was worried about, is that people wouldn't take him seriously. He's a scientist, he's a doctor, and people sort of treated him like he's just a mystic, he's a theologian. So this alchemy book that I've been using to create this idea, it was written in about 1913. And it wasn't published until 10 years ago. It's his seminal work. This is a copy of it. It's a huge tome, and it is full of his paintings and calligraphy. Just mind-boggling. It's like a medieval manuscript, hand lettered on parchment, on real skin. Anyway, it's kind of like a new Bible has appeared. And I don't want to put too much emphasis on the difference between one religion or another. But think about this, that in the Christian world, which is what our culture is created out of, our myth is 2,000 years old. And as you can tell from the way the world is right now, it is really wobbling the washing machine. And it feels like it's about to fly apart. We really need a new myth. And to me, this guy offers something that would really balance out not only each of us individually, but the whole culture, the whole world. And I kind of independently, before this book was published, I started creating my own big old fat book. And this is crammed full of, you can look at this too. This is the result of this process. I have a regular career. I'm making art all the time, painting, sculpting. And what I use that book for is overflow. If I get a really great idea and I just don't have time to address it, it goes in the book. And that thing is almost half full. So, there's a lot coming out. I'm not trying to brag, I'm just saying that this is the hope of this kind of process. That it's hard to understand. You don't really, it's so subtle, you're not really sure you're getting it, but when you do start to get it, there's this way that your life starts to come alive. It's really an amazing thing. So as an example, I was writing the notes for this class. I was writing about how the symbolic life is very, very easy to find if you know what to look for. Like, it's everywhere. Everything you look at, you can look once and see twice. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to run an experiment. I know that this is true. I want to bring together two random photographs. And I only had two constraints. One is that I wanted to use my own so I didn't have to run into any copyright issues. I wanted to have a pairing that's very, very opposite. So I chose a portrait and a landscape. Now I'm going to put these together and see if there isn't a double meaning. So I want to show you the amazing result. I'm going to show you two photographs. Here's the first one. It's a seascape. I took it myself about a year ago. And just study that. It's a lovely cloud scene. Try to look at the whole thing, memorize what it looks like. And I am going to astonish you with this effect. I'm going to show you a second photograph, and then we're going to come back to this. And you will not see that landscape the same. In fact, I challenge you to even imagine it the same after you've seen the second photograph.
Because I've seen you show me that, I can't.
You can't go back.
No.
Once you step over the threshold, you cannot go back. So, Dundee, if you could hit the down arrow. There's the portrait. Right? Now go back, hit the up arrow. What I saw was once I sandwiched those two together, I go back to the landscape, and her face is in the clouds, including her expression. Now do it again. Look at the expression. So her expression is like confrontive, pretty severe. You go back to the landscape, it is confrontive and severe. Isn't that amazing? So my contention is that these possibilities are everywhere around us. We can always look once and see twice. I took a walk up in the woods just thinking about this weekend. And about every 10 seconds, I saw a double image. I would see something and see two things in it. For an example, up ahead of me, I'm seeing a grouse, beautiful grouse. What's it doing out this time of year? And I creep up on it, I know it's gonna fly, keep creeping up on it, and it transforms into a rock. Now this is a real thing that's happening in my head, right? What I'm discovering is that part of the beauty of this process is it makes me come alive, it makes me look for this stuff. I'm feeling this experience with another human being. All I have to do is turn around and see it in the world. And this is constantly available for us. I'm so captivated by this process. If sometime during the next year or so you're curious about something, give me a call or an email and let's talk about it, because I really want to be able to share this experience. Actually, I think there hasn't been a development in the art of life drawing since the 19th century, since women were allowed into the studio. I can't think of anything that has moved forward. And here is the first time that I'm aware of that there's really kind of a development in this process.
Whoa, every way we travel must end, but